Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jenna Schrenard, Head of Marketing at PCA Technology Group, and I'll be your host for this webinar. Before I hand it over to your expert, Brian Powell, who is our CTO and Certified Ethical Hacker at PCA, I just want to touch on a few quick items. So many of you have probably had the chance to join our monthly cybersecurity user awareness trainings with Brian, which is still a monthly event at PCA. In fact, our next one is tomorrow at 11 a.m., so be sure to sign up if you haven't yet. But in addition to those monthly trainings, we wanted to kick off 2024 with a brand new series, which is this 30-minute CyberSmart series. There's so many evolving parts to cybersecurity, and Brian is here to dive into what you need to know about some important topics, which takes us to our today's topic, which is understanding the difference between vulnerability scans and pen testing. So this webinar will be recorded, and you can keep a lookout for a follow-up email with the recording and some additional resources for your reference. And as we go through the next 30 minutes or so, if there are any questions at all, please don't hesitate to drop them in the chat, and we'll make sure to get those answered for you before we conclude today. So with all that being said, I'd now like to hand it over to Brian Powell from PCA.
Thank you, Jenna. Appreciate it. The whole concept behind these are, there's a lot of terminology and a lot of terms that are used in the technical realm that really confuse people sometimes. So the idea behind this CyberSmart series is to kind of go over some of these terms, explain them in English, and really kind of make people aware of maybe some of the differences. So specifically today, we're going to be covering vulnerability scans and penetration testing, also knowing what the difference is, because a lot of times one is sold as the other. And sometimes they're confused as well. So it's just trying to get the word out there to make sure everybody understands exactly what they are and what they're getting. So my name is Brian. I'm the CTO here. I do know how to do some of this hacking thing. We're not talking about that today, but a little bit of the pen testing side. It might go a little deep into that, at least touch the surface of it. But anyways, that's kind of my creds. A bunch of letters behind my name. I don't need to go over each and every one of those, so we'll just leave it at that. So some of the things that we're going to cover here is from an agenda side, we're going to cover vulnerability scans. We're going to explain, what is a vulnerability scan, what are they for, what type of networks and stuff are available for that. So there's different types of vulnerability scans, and then pen testing or penetration testing. Again, what that is, exactly what the difference of that is versus a vulnerability scan, and things like that. And then vulnerability management is kind of encompassing a little bit of some of those results. So we'll touch a little bit on that too. So what exactly is a vulnerability scan? So I like to use English terminology for non-technical people, because I can't really assume it's not wise to assume that everybody knows what you're talking about. So a vulnerability scan, think of it as someone walking down the sidewalk, in front of your house. So what can I see from a vulnerability scan? And this would be kind of like an exterior or an external vulnerability scan. While walking past your house, I could see, well, maybe you have 5 windows in the front of your house. You have a door. You have a screen door. Maybe you have an air conditioner in your window, on the side or something. Do you have a sliding patio door on the side? I can see all those things just by simply walking past your house. So what value is that? That's kind of what an external vulnerability scan does. It kind of sees what are the potential openings that are there. Is the window propped open? Well, hey, look, I can see you have your window open. I walk past there 2 or 3 times a day, and I see that your front window's open because you're bringing in fresh air. What's to stop someone from potentially going through that window? Maybe you have a dog. Maybe you have an alarm system. Maybe you're armed. You don't know. So that's kind of what a vulnerability scan does. It looks at things, and this is targeting, things that could potentially allow weaknesses, and it could be computer systems, it could be firewalls, it could be any type of system or network that has a security weakness. So that's what a vulnerability scan does. Now, I will say we've run into some instances where a lot of people are coining vulnerability scans as penetration testing, and we will talk about what the differences are, because they are not the same. So you definitely need to make sure that if you are using someone that is claiming to be doing a pen test, you need to make sure that you are clarifying that this is in fact a penetration test and not simply a vulnerability scan. And I'll explain as we go through here what the differences are. So why would you need a vulnerability scan? So again, if you're not aware of your weaknesses, you can't really protect yourself or resolve those weaknesses without at least looking into these type of things. So a vulnerability scan will identify vulnerabilities within your systems that could go otherwise unnoticed, and the only time you're going to find out about it is if a bad actor actually leverages it on you. And that's not the time you want to find out about it. So, again, if you're doing an external scan, it's basically what vulnerabilities, if any, are happening from the outside of your organization inside. And it will kind of rank based on scoring. So, as the bullet points at the bottom here, it'll basically tell you, hey, is this a well-known issue, or is it critical? And sometimes as we get into vulnerability management at the end here, it could be, it doesn't matter if it's a high incident, if it's ranked high, if it's not being actively exploited or things like that, it may not necessarily be a high issue that you need to address, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. So you also want to protect your data. So, obviously the biggest thing is the first and foremost thing is human and health safety. Obviously, that's the first thing. So if you have something that is detrimental to your employees from a safety factor or anything like that, that's first and foremost. And then after that comes, the other business aspects of it. That's just one thing, that many people don't think about. So you got to protect your data, not only with your data internally, but potentially if your customers have data with you as well. And sometimes vulnerability scans are required for compliance. Anything from accepting credit cards to HIPAA compliance or DFS, depending on what you're doing. That's kind of another reason why sometimes you'll have to have a vulnerability scan. Again, is to light up any potential issues before the bad guys find them before you do. Normally, we recommend vulnerability scans to be done at the minimum, at least quarterly. Sometimes you can do them more frequently, just because what isn't a vulnerability today could be a vulnerability tomorrow. And it's just there's always new incidents and stuff popping up all over the place. So it's just one of those things to realize that it is something that you should be doing on a very frequent basis. So as I mentioned, there's a couple different types of vulnerability scans. Predominantly most people perform external scans. And external scans, again, is looking from the outside in, sort of like, again, me walking down the sidewalk in front of your house. I can see some of the windows, things of that nature. So that would be an external scan. So, an internal scan is pretty straightforward. It's just basically doing it from the inside. So now, this is going to look at your inside of your network or your organization and see what is vulnerable if a bad actor were to get in from the outside. Now, what is on the inside that they could potentially leverage or use against you? So again, it's the same concept. It's just instead one's on the outside, one's on the inside. Again, if you can afford to do both, or you can perform those needed steps to do both, highly recommend doing both, because again, all it takes is for someone to open up an email potentially, and that bad actor is now on the inside, even if you don't have a vulnerability on the outside that's letting them physically in. So it at least gives you an idea of what is going on internally and things that you can potentially fix, patch, whatever, depending on what the vulnerability is. And again, you can't protect what you don't know. And these, by doing an internal, it also kind of gives you a makeshift asset inventory. So it's something that you may not have had already. Now hey, this thing's going to light up everything on the network that's turned on at that point. For everything from your copiers, your IoT devices that you may not know someone plugged in, things of those nature. So it does kind of give you, it's not designed for that, but the effect of the scan itself will actually give you that inventory. So you kind of know what's on your network at that point. And then at the bottom here, there's two different types. So one is an uncredentialed scan, and the other one is a credentialed scan. So the difference between the two really is it's the uncredentialed is basically acting as an attacker who has not, so the first thing that an attacker is going to do if they happen to get in is look at what the network is. So this is thinking of an unescalated attacker doing an internal scan to try to see what devices are on there that they might be able to pivot, leverage, do all kinds of things, and try to escalate their credentials. So no password, no username. It's just basically looking from the outside, not having any information or any password or username stuff available. A credential scan is exactly the opposite of that. This is with using a known credential, usually of a user or maybe even a privileged account. And what that does is it shows a lot more information that you may not be able to obtain with an uncredentialed scan. It basically will light up a little bit more information where you can get a lot more detailed than what you normally would with an uncredentialed scan. We normally recommend if you are going to do internals, I highly suggest doing both or credentialed, only because it definitely gives you a lot more visibility. I like doing both just because it kind of shows you both sides of the fence personally. That's just me. But it at least gives you an idea. Okay, if the guy doesn't have, escalation privileges, what's it look like? And then you're going to see, well, here's what it is once they get it, not if they get it. It's once they escalate it, because if they're in the door, they're probably going to escalate their credentials pretty quickly. This is what it looks like afterwards. So that's why I kind of like doing both. So with that said, penetration testing. So what is a penetration test? Go back to the house analogy. So a vulnerability scan is me walking down the street saying, okay, I see you got windows in the front. I see you got an air conditioner. I see you got a sliding door. That's a vulnerability scan. I'm basically casing your house is kind of what you could call that. It's basically casing your network from the outside. So what is a penetration test? Well, a penetration test is going to the next layer. So penetration tests do use vulnerability scans. That's usually part of the scope that happens prior to a penetration test. So they will run a vulnerability scan, because if a penetration tester is trying to get into your network, obviously, if there's known holes, they're going to try to leverage those holes from the vulnerability scan. So the penetration test is basically, hey, I'm going to walk up to your house. Is your door unlocked? If your door's unlocked, guess what? I basically penetrated your security of your network or your home. Can I open the window? Or is the sliding door open? Is there a dog in there? If I walk past there numerous times, I don't see a dog in the backyard or any signs of a dog. That might give me some indicators. I'm assuming that, but again, you might get some indicators of things like that. That's kind of part of the reconnaissance part of the penetration test. Is there an air conditioner in the window? Can I actually push that through the window? Because that's a lot of things, criminals do that if they're trying to break into your house. If it's not blocked at the top with wood, or sometimes there's locks on the window that won't let you open it up the whole way, and things like that. So, that is a penetration test. So it's basically simulating a hacker attempting to get into your business through whatever research and exploitation of vulnerabilities. Again, the vulnerability scan is a piece of this. So usually when you buy a pen test, they are going to do a vulnerability scan. But again, make sure that if you're purchasing what you think is a pen test, make sure that it is actually scoped as a pen test, and not just simply, oh, well, we're going to give you a list of vulnerability scans and out the door they go. So it is totally different. Different skill set, different type of mentality, and things like that. So why would you need a pen test? Well, again, you can only protect yourself so much. So the vulnerability scan might show you some vulnerabilities to fix, or maybe it'll come back and say, you know what, you don't have any vulnerabilities. So what does a pen test do? Well, usually it allows you to do one thing. It can either confirm your existing security measures that you already have in place. So, any measures that you have in place, in theory, if they work as well as what you believe they're going to do, is you are going to, this should stop a penetration tester from being able to get in through any type of means that they try to leverage, or they will be detected if they would happen to get through. And more likely than not, depending on how far the scope goes, on the engagement, they'll probably get in one way, shape, or form. Usually, it would be very rare, that a good penetration tester can't get in. They find means to do it. It's usually, and more likely than not, it's always the human factor that lets them in. That's it depends on the scope and how far you want to go. But it does test your layers. The other thing too is it gives you a clear understanding of your security posture. So this is testing, your posture. Now it is a point in time. So most times penetration testing is done. If it's for compliance things, a lot of times they recommend doing it annually. If you can get an engagement that you can do it more frequently, that's great. Because the more often you can test against this, the more accurate your actual real-time security posture is. Is this going to stop every possible attack? No. Anybody that tells you any differently is not being truthful. There's no way you can stop every potential attack vector or risk that's going to happen. You try to eliminate the risk as best you can. There's at some point, sometime, something's going to happen. It's just the reality of it. It's just a matter of when something happens. So it also, the pen test in also will give you not only a detailed version of how they did what they did, but it also will give you an idea of how to remediate that potential thing. So let's say it wasn't a vulnerability and they did leverage a human factor. The report that you're going to get back from that penetration test is going to say, here's exactly what we did. We used this method. It was an email phishing thing. The guy clicked on it, or maybe I called him up on the phone and he gave me his password. Whatever it might be, those things are going to be on that report, and you can definitely utilize that to protect yourself from those things, or train your individual users if it was that. There's also 0 false positives. So unlike in a vulnerability scan, sometimes vulnerabilities will come back depending on what you're scanning for and what the results come back. A lot of times you'll get false positives. Penetration test, there is no false positives. You're either in or you're not in. So it's one of those situations where, yes, this is what we leveraged, or no, this didn't work, and we move on to the next potential task. So again, it's a more straightforward approach that gives you a very, very good idea of what your security posture is. They are scoped engagements, so they can, depending on your engagement, you can go as far as it could be a physical penetration test. A lot of people look at the technical side of this and don't think about the physical side of this. The physical test is a red team, basically, that's designed to break into your they're hired to literally get physical access to your facility or whatever. So it's one of those situations where if you have great technical protections and things in place, layered defenses in place, if someone could just walk in the front door with a box of donuts or a thing of pizza and walk right in the building and nobody even stops them, what good is your technical, because they're already inside? So it could be things like that too. And again, I already mentioned the detailed report findings at the end there too. So external versus internal, again, much like the vulnerability scan. So external is going to try to find and leverage means from the outside. There's some reconnaissance that's being done on the outside. Some of that's vulnerability scans. Some of it might be some social engineering attacks as well. And so it basically gives you real world attack vectors that looks like a bad actor coming in. However, the pen tester isn't there to shut your network down or to steal your data. They're just trying to simulate that. So they're ethical hackers, is what it's called basically. And they're going to report on how they got in if they did get in from the outside in. And then the internal is the exact reverse of that. There's going to be some methods It's basically going to test once an actor gets inside some of the tools that are leveraged. They might dump password hashes. They might try to elevate permissions. They might do some man-in-the-middle attacks, some DNS spoofing, maybe MAC spoofing, which basically is tricking users from the inside. You think you're going to a web page on the outside when in fact it's actually pointing to the internal machine that the internal pen tester is running, and it just looks like it's the right site. And if you're not careful, you could put your credentials in there and they can reuse those credentials and things like that. So there's value in both. Again, it's one of those situations where the more frequent you can do these, the better off at least your security posture would be. It really comes down to budget and need. However, the more frequent you can do it, the better off you would be. So. And that leads us to vulnerability management. So what is vulnerability management? As I kind of alluded to when we talked about vulnerability scans, it's kind of it's a cyclical practice, basically, that you're discovering issues, you're prioritizing what those issues are, you're assessing them, reporting them, remediating them, and then verifying again. So it's constantly going around a wheel, basically, because with security, just because your vulnerability scan came back clean today, you might run it tomorrow and it might not come back clean because vulnerabilities are getting added daily, and software is constantly being updated. Now, obviously, there comes a point where you can only do so much of this, but vulnerability will keep track, the management will keep track of all those findings. And then as you remediate them, you can kind of see, hey, your posture is going up or whatever, hey, we knocked off four things off the list of 20 that we did, so you can show progressive improvement in your time. And it gives validation that you're actually taking security seriously too. So, again, it's one of those things where, depending on who's doing the pen test and who's doing the vulnerability scan, sometimes the vulnerability management might be an add-on. So it could very well be one of those situations where both the results actually feed into a portal of some sort where you can keep track of your results of everything, and see how you're doing and keep a history chain of what that hopefully improvement and progression is on those. So not many people are doing this right now. I'm not saying it's usually larger organizations. But it's just something that I wanted to make you aware of. If you ever see that terminology of what that is, that's kind of the definition of it. So again, what does vulnerability management do? So even though it could be a highly ranked score from the scoring system, if it's not being utilized in the real world, there's no point in spending a whole ton of time on it. Whereas it could be a low vulnerability on the scoring scale, but they're using it left and right and leveraging it all over the place. That would obviously take higher precedence. That's kind of what it does. It looks at, how's it being, what's the landscape of the threat landscape looking like for that particular vulnerability, and is it being exploitable? So that's kind of where just doing a vulnerability scan on its own wouldn't always necessarily show you that, depending on the product that's being used. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But this management thing, again, we kind of give you a good management level view of, hey, you know what, we've got 10 vulnerabilities here that the scans found, or the pen test found. What do we want to do with these? Well, let's look at the real world data that goes along with them. Okay, the score is a 10. But the exploitability or the threat landscape is showing a 1. Okay, well, now we got an 8 and a 7. You're going to probably want to move that higher to the top if it's something that could easily be solved or things like that, because that has a more high risk of actually being attempted than the one that has the lower score. So it just gives you some scoring capabilities and kind of a roadmap type thing for you to consider. So just kind of figuring, recapping this again, vulnerability scans will improve your security. It'll increase your compliance, lower your business risks, also increase customer trust. And on the penetration test side, You're looking at real world security posture, no false positives. Like I said, you only got, it's either yes or a no, pretty much. It tests your existing controls, and frequency, as I mentioned, is important. The more frequent you can do penetration tests, the better off you are. If you can, afford to do those. Vulnerability management is prioritizing risk based on threat analytics. That's really what the vulnerability management does. And hopefully, these two things feed into that platform or that vulnerability management, so you have an overall holistic view of what's going on for each of these. So with that, that's pretty much it. As I mentioned, these are quick, short to the point type of seminars. Our next one is coming up on the 20th, and it's basically labeled "What the DR." And basically that is, if anybody has seen, there's XDR, there's NDR, there's EDR, there's all kinds of DRs out there, and everyone's like, what the heck is all this stuff? So we're going to go through and kind of give definitions of what all those DR acronyms mean, what's the concept is behind them, and go from there. So I thank you for your time. Jenna, do we have any questions that are in there that I missed?
Yeah, no, awesome. Thank you, Brian. A lot of great content as always. Yeah, I do want to open it up right now and kind of remind our audience to go ahead and submit any questions that you have in the chat. We don't have any right now, but if you guys think of anything in the next couple minutes, please go ahead before we conclude. And while you're doing that, I did drop the link just now in the chat to register for that next event next month. And just to emphasize, what Brian said, we're really just here to be a trusted resource for you and help you succeed with IT. And we understand that requires education around these important topics, to help protect you. So after today's session, if you do have an interest in learning more about pen tests or vol scans and kind of what that would look like, for your unique environment, please just email us directly at info@pcatg.com. But I'll jump back to the chat here. So it doesn't look like we have any questions at this time. But again, if something comes up as you're kind of digesting this presentation, we'll send it around after this via email. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. But any final thoughts from you, Brian?
Yeah, no, I just, hopefully this was insightful for you. And if you do have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them. Or if you're interested in any of this isn't sales oriented, but again, if you're interested in talking further about this, reach out to us and we'd be happy to talk further about this and your potential needs. So I appreciate everyone taking their time today. We'll give you back, it looks like, a couple minutes here at the end, but totally appreciate it. And thank you very much. And hopefully we'll see you next month.
Absolutely. Thanks, Brian. Thanks everyone again for attending, and we'll see you next time.